The 70s. Disco, drugs, and porn. These are some of the factors in Paul Thomas Anderson's breakout 1997 film Boogie Nights. With an all-star cast of Mark Wahlberg, Burt Reynolds, Julianne Moore, Heather Graham, Don Cheadle, John C. Reilly, and Philip Seymour Hoffman. The film centers around the young 17-year-old Mark Wahlberg, who plays the character of Eddie Adams, a kid working as a dishwasher at a disco club in LA, trying to somehow carve out a spot for himself among the famous people he sees every night. He is soon discovered in a nightclub by Jack Horner, a pornographic film director, and with a little convincing, he is able to make Eddie a star in the porn industry under the new name Dirk Diggler.
And his name is just so bright and so sharp that the sign, it just blows up because the name is just so powerful. It says Dirk Diggler.
The film encompasses the rise, fall, and redemption of our main character, along with subplots of side characters, and overall the odd theme of family throughout the film. Though I will speak about these aspects later in the video, the main thing I want to speak about is not the story itself, but the subtextual context that the film has about the era of filmmaking it takes place in. You see, I was just recently able to watch this film in the cinema on a 35mm print, and the film blew me away again. It is one of my favorite films, but another viewing of the film on the big screen made more ideas about the film open up. And it was also mainly thanks to Adam Naiman, film critic, lecturer, and author who was able to speak at the screening about the film. The film talks about a lot of things, but I want to talk about what the film represents. The film does a brilliant way at comparing the interesting parallel between the porn industry and the film industry and connecting the two, and using the porn industry of the 70s as an allegory to represent the death of New Hollywood. You see, in the 70s, it was a lot different. Adult films couldn't be filmed on an iPhone or a digital camera. It had to be film, which meant money, which meant a budget. So it had to be shot on a larger scale production. It was an actual movie set, maybe less than what larger films were shooting at the time, but you had a full crew, actors, scripts, and an editing process. And remember, these films weren't being mass produced, so they had to be entertaining enough to bring somebody into the cinema and watch. This all began in 1969 when the artist Andy Warhol released the film Blue Movie, which was actually taken critically seriously. It was reviewed by the likes of Roger Ebert and was even spoken about by Johnny Carson and Bob Hope. The film sparked a nationwide shift where films featuring explicit adult content were being mass-produced, and this was all thanks to the cultural shift in America from the free love movement. Now, adult films were not only being mass-produced, but they were being mass-released, some even having premieres, and they were being reviewed and critiqued by real film industry professionals.
What's going on at the Dirty Movie Place?
Well, they're having a premiere.
Dirty movies have premieres?
Yeah, they're fun.
Along the same time in the 1970s, you had New Hollywood appearing, a very exciting time to be a film fan, with the new emerging stars, directors, and talent, and new freedom was coming to films. They were no longer going to be your parents' films. They were films for the generation, and from filmmakers who were going to shake up Hollywood, including Woody Allen, John Carpenter, Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, David Lynch, George Lucas, George A. Romero, Martin Scorsese, Ridley Scott, and Steven Spielberg, including a wide range of films including The Graduate, Easy Rider, Star Wars, Alien, Wild Bunch, Taxi Driver, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jaws, Godfather, Westworld, Apocalypse Now, Raging Bull, Halloween, and Dawn of the Dead. These films marked a cultural shift in filmmaking. It was gritty, it was explicit, it was violent, it was sad, it was scary, and it was real. It related with audiences, and though many of these films are classic now, at the time these were brand new and fresh to the eyes of the audiences in the 70s. Characters didn't have to be a good person anymore. They could have flaws, or maybe they could even be the villains of the story. Science fiction was no longer flying saucers, but they were space operas, inspired by Akira Kurosawa. And aliens were no longer little green men with eyes, but they were large, scary aliens from H.R. Geiger's work. It was the time to be alive to be a movie fan. The genuine stories from the filmmakers were pouring from the screen, and the raw elements made the era so exciting. But the most exciting part is it was just the beginning. Many of these directors were young, and they were just beginning their work. And this brings us back to the film Boogie Nights. You see, Jack Horner wants to make a movie, and not just an adult movie, but an actual movie.
No, I understand. You've got to get them in the theater, you know? You got to keep the seats full. But I don't want to make a film where they show up, they sit down, they jack off, and they get up and they get out before the story ends. It is my dream, it is my goal, it is my idea to make a film that the story just sucks them in. And when they spurt out that joy juice, they just got to sit in it. They can't move until they find out how the story ends.
And of course it's going to have sexual content in it, but his idea is never scolded or laughed at in the film. And that is because we just learned an adult film in the 70s, if done right, can get a lot of praise in both circles. You see, Jack doesn't just see himself as an adult filmmaker trying to make a quick buck. He sees himself as an actual artist. Jack and Dirk, they represent New Hollywood, the young talent onto the scene ready to shake up the world, and they successfully do so. They make their films and Dirk becomes a huge star, and with the help of Dirk and fellow porn star Reed Rothschild, played by John C. Reilly, they create the action spy adult films Brocklanders and Chest Rockwell, which Jack's editor claims,
"It's a real film, Jack."
Though cheesy with bad acting and it's played for laughs, Jack is genuinely proud of the film, succeeding in his goal. He and Dirk shook up the world, but something unexpected is about to take place. The New Year's Eve party in the film takes place exactly halfway through the film, splitting the film into two eras with a definite tone difference, rise and fall. Perfectly represented by Little Bill's suicide. It brings a whole lot of new problems, and you begin to see the more gritty side of these characters' glamorous lives. Drug addiction, trouble with the law, family issues, and Dirk's falling out with Jack, resulting in his deep dive into drugs. The biggest issue that comes in the 80s is the introduction of videotape, the inexpensive alternative to film.
Moments like these do anything other than Kodak videotape. It captures the sights and sounds of every moment with color that's beautifully accurate.
You see, Jack's career is not in jeopardy, but his self-identification as an artist is. Much like many filmmakers even now, Jack believed in the power of film, but the future was no longer on celluloid. Tape was cheaper and easier. This meant now these films were going to be mass-produced. People can skip, fast forward, rewind. The whole experience was gone.
Yeah, I love this. Like, I make these little mixtapes together. You know, I put all my favorite songs together. Hey, Charles, which one is this? Number 11. Yeah, I love it. You know, when you buy a tape or something or an album, you put it on, and the songs are like the bands put them in some fucking order, like they want you to listen to it in that order. You know, I hate that. I fucking hate that. I don't like to be told what to listen to, when to listen to it, or anything.
Which meant his films devolved just into smut. This all mimics the death of New Hollywood in the new age of the 80s. The 80s saw another cultural shift in America, which had a focus on consumerism and capitalism, and malls became more and more popular. Fashion, music, and now movies had to keep up with the demand of being flashy and eye-grabbing. The audience was no longer interested in gritty films like Taxi Driver, but they wanted blockbusters, which was mainly due to the mass success of films like Jaws and Star Wars in the New Hollywood era. But now every studio wanted a heavy hitter movie that would become a blockbuster hit, which drowned other films of the decade.
The 80s and the 50s were the worst time for movies ever. After the 70s, where everything was just go as far as you can, then all of a sudden everything got watered down. In the 70s, you had movies where it's like characters weren't necessarily the hero. They were fucked up, but they were interesting characters. Then all of a sudden in the 80s, all that was washed away. And the most important thing about a character was that they were likable.
This all represents Jack's story and the artificial films he makes now. Films that are overstimulating and unrealistic. No plot, no grace, but just the images to make the user feel satisfied and be off with their day. The film actually ends on a happy note with a theme of family being found, and it shows that these oddball porn stars are actually just one big happy family, and really the only family that they have. And that they are real people too, but their jobs and their careers just involve sex. The happy ending shows the future Paul Thomas Anderson saw in 1997, which brought another wave of new directors that were going to pave the way into the new century. With the rise of low-budget productions, as well as filmmakers like Richard Linklater and Quentin Tarantino, whose films Dazed and Confused and Pulp Fiction helped pave the way for Anderson to make a film on such risky subject matter with such an all-star cast. The ending of the film also mimics the ending of Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull, which goes to show how much of a fan Anderson was of New Hollywood. I do not personally have an issue with the films of the 80s, but some critics and filmmakers do.
The 80s and the 50s were the worst time for movies.
The high of the 70s and the change of technology and culture in the 80s were a shift for many. Paul Thomas Anderson does a great job using the porn industry as an allegory for his view of the cultural shift in America and film at the time. And if we can't thank him for that, then we can thank him for the sweet songs of Mark Wahlberg in the film.